I walked into the jewelry store wearing my simple cotton dress from 3 seasons ago. The ring on my finger caught the light, but to them, it looked like nothing special. The sales associate rolled her eyes. The customers whispered and pointed. Then a man in an expensive suit walked through the door. And suddenly everyone's attitude changed completely. They didn't know my ring was designed by the most famous jewelry artist in the world. But they were about to learn. Before you judge something by its appearance, remember that true value often hides in plain sight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. This is a story about authenticity, true love, and discovering that the most precious things in life rarely announce themselves with fanfare. My name is Catherine, and I never imagined that a simple piece of jewelry would teach me so much about human nature and the power of staying true to yourself. I'm 34 years old, living in the heart of downtown Portland, where the rain seems to wash the city clean every other day. My apartment is small but filled with books, plants that somehow survive despite my irregular watering schedule, and photographs from travels I saved years to afford. I work as a freelance graphic designer, which means some months I can splurge on organic groceries, and other months I'm counting quarters for bus fare. It's an unpredictable life, but it's mine, and I've learned to find joy in the uncertainty. My style has always been understated. I prefer vintage finds from thrift stores over designer labels, handmade pottery over fine china, and quiet coffee shops over trendy restaurants. Some people call it bohemian, others call it practical. I just call it authentic to who I am. 3 years ago, everything changed when I met David at a community art fair where I was selling my photography prints. He approached my booth with genuine curiosity, asking thoughtful questions about my technique and the stories behind each image. Unlike most people who browse art fairs, he wasn't looking for something to match his couch or impress his friends. He was looking for connection, for meaning, for something that spoke to his soul. David was different from anyone I'd ever met. He dressed simply, drove an older Honda Civic that had seen better days, and seemed to find magic in the most ordinary moments. Our first date was a picnic in the park with sandwiches we made together, followed by hours of conversation that flowed as naturally as breathing. He told me he worked in design, though he was vague about the details, and I didn't press. I was more interested in his thoughts about life, his dreams, his way of seeing beauty in unexpected places. Our relationship unfolded like a slow, beautiful sunrise. We spent Saturday mornings at farmers markets, choosing vegetables for dinner, as if we were selecting precious gems. We took long walks through different neighborhoods, imagining the lives of people behind lit windows. David had this wonderful ability to make the mundane feel magical. A rainy Tuesday became an adventure when we got caught in a downpour and ended up dancing on an empty street corner, laughing until our sides hurt. What I loved most about David was his authenticity. He never tried to impress me with expensive gifts or fancy restaurants. Instead, he'd show up with a book he thought I'd love, or surprise me with homemade bread he'd spent all morning perfecting. He listened when I talked about my work struggles, offering genuine support without trying to fix everything. He celebrated my small victories as enthusiastically as if I'd won a Nobel Prize. 8 months into our relationship, David started acting differently. Not distant, but thoughtful in a way that made me wonder if something was troubling him. He'd catch me staring at him sometimes, and smile that mysterious smile that made my heart skip. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd just say he was thinking about our future, which both thrilled and terrified me. I had learned not to plan too far ahead, not to expect permanence from good things. One evening in late spring, David suggested we take a walk to our favorite spot overlooking the river. The city lights reflected on the water like scattered diamonds, and the air carried the scent of blooming cherry trees. We sat on our usual bench, watching couples stroll by and listening to the gentle sound of water lapping against the shore. David seemed nervous, fidgeting with something in his jacket pocket. When he suddenly dropped to one knee, my world stopped spinning. But what happened next was so perfectly David that I should have expected it. Instead of pulling out a typical engagement ring box, he opened a small cloth pouch and withdrew the most unusual ring I'd ever seen. It wasn't flashy or obviously expensive. The band appeared to be made of some kind of unique metal that seemed to shift colors in the light, and instead of a traditional center stone, it featured an intricate design that looked almost like a miniature sculpture. "Catherine," David said, his voice shaking slightly, I had this made specifically for you. It's not like anything you'll find in a regular jewelry store, because you're not like anyone I've ever met. This ring represents everything I love about you. Your creativity, your authenticity, your ability to see beauty where others see ordinary. Will you marry me? The ring was extraordinary in its subtlety. The metalwork was incredibly detailed, with tiny elements that revealed themselves only upon close examination. The design seemed to tell a story, with flowing lines that reminded me of wind through trees, or water over stones, or the way light moves across a wall at sunset. It was art you could wear, poetry made tangible, and it was absolutely perfect for me. Of course I said yes. As David slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt like I was putting on a piece of his heart, something created specifically to symbolize our unique love story. The ring fit perfectly, not just physically but emotionally. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, meaningful without being obvious, special without screaming for attention, just like our relationship itself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the weeks following our engagement, I wore the ring everywhere with pride. Most people didn't give it a second glance, which was exactly what I expected and preferred. It wasn't the kind of ring that demanded attention or sparked immediate envy. Close friends and family who knew me well understood that David had chosen something perfectly suited to my personality. My sister Emma, who has always favored more traditional styles, was initially puzzled by the unconventional design but admitted it looked beautiful on my hand. My mother, ever the romantic, was enchanted by the story of how David had it specially made. She spent an afternoon examining every detail through her reading glasses, marveling at the craftsmanship and asking me to tell her again about the proposal. My father, practical as always, simply said that any man who put that much thought into understanding what would make me happy was a keeper. David and I began planning a simple wedding ceremony that would reflect our values and style. We chose a small venue in a botanical garden, with natural beauty providing all the decoration we needed. Our guest list included only our closest friends and immediate family. We wrote our own vows, choosing words that felt authentic rather than borrowed from tradition. Everything about our wedding planning felt like an extension of who we were as individuals and as a couple. But as our engagement progressed, I began to encounter reactions to my ring that surprised me. At the coffee shop where I often worked on my laptop, I noticed a barista glancing at my hand with what looked like amusement. When I went to get my nails done for the first time in months, treating myself to a small luxury, the manicurist examined my ring with barely concealed skepticism. Her smile was polite, but her eyes suggested she was thinking something entirely different. The first truly uncomfortable encounter happened at a boutique, where I was shopping for a dress for our engagement party. The saleswoman was initially friendly and helpful, showing me several options that fit both my style and budget. But when she noticed my ring, her demeanor subtly shifted. She began steering me toward less expensive options, assuming that someone wearing such an unconventional ring couldn't afford the nicer pieces. When I asked to try on a dress that was admittedly more than I usually spent on clothing, she hesitated. "Are you sure?" she asked, glancing meaningfully at my hand. "This particular designer is quite expensive." The implication was clear. My ring had given her information about my financial situation, and she was trying to save us both from embarrassment. I tried on the dress anyway, and it was perfect. As I stood in front of the three-way mirror, I felt beautiful and confident. The saleswoman's reflection appeared behind me, still looking doubtful. "It is lovely on you," she said carefully, "but perhaps you'd like to see something more in your range?" She said the last part quietly, as if protecting me from some humiliation. What bothered me most wasn't her assumption about my finances, but her assumption that the value of my engagement ring somehow indicated the depth of my relationship or David's feelings for me. In her mind, a non-traditional ring meant a non-serious commitment, a bargain basement romance that deserved bargain basement respect. I bought the dress, partly because I loved it, and partly because I refused to let her limited perspective dictate my choices. But as I walked home, I found myself looking at my ring with new eyes, wondering what messages it was sending to the world and whether I cared about those messages. That evening, I told David about the experience. He listened with growing indignation, his jaw tightening as I described the saleswoman's behavior. "I'm sorry you had to deal with that," he said, taking my hand and examining the ring as if seeing it for the first time. "Does it bother you that people don't immediately recognize its value?" I considered the question carefully. "It bothers me that people make assumptions," I said finally. But I love this ring because it represents us, not because of what strangers think about it. David smiled at that, pulling me close. Good, he said, because I chose it specifically because it's not like anything else. Just like you. But the encounters continued. At the grocery store, a woman in line behind me noticed my ring and made a comment to her friend about young people these days thinking they could get married with toy rings. At a restaurant where David and I were celebrating his birthday, our server seemed surprised when David paid with a high-end credit card, given what she'd apparently assumed about us based on my modest engagement ring. Each incident was small, individually insignificant. But collectively, they began to wear on me. I started becoming self-conscious about my hand, sometimes finding myself tucking it into my pocket or positioning it so the ring was less visible. I hated that I was letting other people's opinions affect how I felt about something so precious to me. The breaking point came during a particularly stressful week, when everything seemed to go wrong at once. A major client had rejected my design proposal, my laptop had crashed, taking 3 days of work with it, and my landlord had announced a rent increase that would stretch my budget to its breaking point. David was traveling for work, so I couldn't even seek comfort in his steady presence. Feeling overwhelmed and needing to treat myself to something small, I decided to browse a jewelry store I'd walked past countless times. I thought maybe I'd find a simple necklace or earrings, something pretty to lift my spirits. The store was elegant but not intimidating, with warm lighting and classical music playing softly in the background. I was examining a display of vintage-inspired necklaces when a sales associate approached. She was impeccably dressed, with perfect makeup and hair that looked like she'd just stepped out of a salon. Her smile was professional, but her eyes were already assessing, taking in my casual outfit and inevitably my ring. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, her tone suggesting she doubted I was there to make a serious purchase. When I expressed interest in a particular necklace, she glanced at the price tag and then at my hand again. "That's one of our more expensive pieces," she said carefully. "Perhaps I could show you something more suitable." The word suitable hung in the air between us, loaded with implications about what she thought I could afford, what she thought I deserved, what she thought someone with my ring should be looking at. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, a combination of embarrassment and anger that made my hands shake slightly. Before I could respond, another customer entered the store. She was everything I wasn't in that moment. Designer handbag, perfect manicure, jewelry that announced itself from across the room. The sales associate's entire demeanor transformed instantly. "Mrs. Hamilton," she exclaimed, practically glowing with enthusiasm. "How wonderful to see you again." I stood there, forgotten, still holding the necklace I'd been interested in. The contrast was stark and painful. Mrs. Hamilton received warm greetings, immediate attention, and genuine enthusiasm, while I had been treated like someone who might accidentally break something expensive. The message was clear. In their world, appearance was everything, and I had been judged and found wanting. As I watched the sales associate fawn over Mrs. Hamilton, showing her piece after piece with obvious delight, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let their narrow perspective diminish my joy in something so meaningful. I walked to the counter where another associate was working, an older gentleman with kind eyes who had been observing the interaction with what looked like disapproval. "I'd like to see that necklace," I said firmly, pointing to the piece I'd been examining. He nodded respectfully and retrieved it for me, handling both the jewelry and my request with the professionalism that should have been standard. The necklace was beautiful, delicate gold work that would complement my engagement ring perfectly. More importantly, it would remind me daily not to let others' opinions overshadow my own sense of worth. As the gentleman was processing my purchase, the first sales associate glanced over with surprise. I could almost see her recalculating, wondering if she had misjudged my financial situation. But it was too late for revised assessments. The damage to my confidence had been done, and more importantly, her true character had been revealed. Walking home with my purchase, I realized something important was happening. Each dismissive encounter, each assumption, each moment of being underestimated was teaching me something valuable about resilience and self-worth. David had chosen a ring that reflected who I truly was, not who the world expected me to be. The question was, would I honor his faith in me, or would I let strangers' limited vision make me doubt myself? That evening I called David despite the time difference. Hearing his voice, warm and familiar across the miles, immediately made me feel grounded again. I told him about the jewelry store experience, and he listened with the patient attention that had made me fall in love with him in the first place. "Catherine," he said when I finished, "I need to tell you something about your ring." My heart skipped, wondering if he was about to reveal some secret I should have known. "I didn't have it made by just anyone. The person who created it is someone very special in the jewelry world. I chose him not because of his reputation, but because his philosophy matches ours. That true beauty doesn't need to shout to be heard." He paused, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. "Your ring was designed by Marcus Chen. He's considered one of the most innovative jewelry artists of our generation. But he deliberately works in ways that don't follow traditional luxury markers. He believes that the most precious pieces should whisper rather than scream." I was quiet, absorbing this information. Marcus Chen. Even I had heard that name, associated with museum exhibitions and collectors who waited years for his work. "Why didn't you tell me before?" I asked. "Because I wanted you to love it for what it represents between us, not because of who made it," David replied. "But maybe it's time you knew the full story. Maybe it's time the world knew too." The next morning I found myself researching Marcus Chen online. What I discovered amazed me. His work was featured in galleries around the world, worn by celebrities who valued artistry over ostentation, collected by people who understood that true luxury lies in exceptional craftsmanship rather than obvious display. His pieces rarely looked like traditional fine jewelry, which was exactly the point. He created wearable art that revealed its secrets slowly to those who took time to truly look. I stared at my ring with new understanding. The shifting colors in the metal weren't an accident. They were the result of a technique Chen had developed, incorporating rare elements that created an almost living surface. The sculptural design wasn't random. It was a carefully composed piece that told the story of two lives intertwining, growing stronger together while maintaining their individual beauty. But even with this knowledge, I realized something important. I hadn't needed external validation to know my ring was special. Its value to me had never depended on Marcus Chen's reputation or the hours of skilled work it represented. It was precious because David had chosen it specifically for me, because it captured something essential about our relationship, because wearing it reminded me daily of the promise we'd made to each other. This realization gave me a new kind of confidence. I began wearing my ring not just with pride, but with a quiet satisfaction in knowing that those who dismissed it were revealing their own limitations. True connoisseurs of beauty, I learned, recognize quality, regardless of how it's packaged. Those who missed it simply weren't looking with educated eyes. A few weeks later, David returned from his business trip with exciting news. Marcus Chen was having a gallery opening in our city, showcasing his latest collection alongside some of his most celebrated pieces from the past decade. David had somehow secured us invitations to the opening reception. "I thought you might enjoy seeing his other work," David said, "and maybe meeting him if the opportunity arises." He specifically asked to meet the woman who's wearing one of his favorite pieces from last year. The gallery opening was unlike anything I'd ever attended. The space was filled with people who moved through the exhibits with genuine appreciation, studying each piece as if it were a painting or sculpture. Chen's jewelry was displayed like art, with careful lighting that brought out the subtle complexities of each design. I wore a simple black dress that let my ring be the statement piece, though I doubted many people would recognize its significance in this setting. As we moved through the gallery, I began to understand Chen's artistic vision more clearly. Each piece told a story, incorporated unexpected elements, challenged conventional ideas about what jewelry should look like. Near the center of the gallery, I noticed a small crowd gathered around one display case. Curious, David and I approached to see what was drawing such attention. Inside the case was a collection of engagement rings, each completely different from traditional designs, each accompanied by a small card telling the story of the couple who owned it. To my complete surprise, there was my ring, or rather, a photograph of it, along with a brief description. Custom piece created for a Portland couple who values authenticity over convention. The design incorporates elements representing the growth of love over time, with metalwork that changes appearance based on light and viewing angle, symbolizing the many facets of a strong relationship. I stared at the display, hardly believing that my personal symbol of love was being celebrated as an example of Chen's artistry. Other visitors were admiring the photograph, discussing the innovative techniques, appreciating the thoughtfulness of the design. It was surreal to watch strangers analyze something so intimate to me, finding beauty and meaning that matched my own experience of wearing it. "Excuse me," a voice said behind us. but I believe that's your ring in the display." We turned to see Marcus Chen himself, a man in his 50s with intelligent eyes and an understated elegance that reminded me of his jewelry. He was smaller than I'd expected, with an almost shy demeanor that contrasted with his international reputation. "I hope you don't mind that I included it in the exhibition," he continued, addressing me directly. "David sent me a photograph when he commissioned the piece, and later sent another showing how beautifully it suited you. It's become one of my favorite examples of how the right design finds the right person." I was speechless, overwhelmed by the kindness in his voice and the realization that this renowned artist had been thinking about my ring, my story, my happiness. David squeezed my hand, clearly enjoying my surprise. "I have to admit," Chen said with a slight smile, "I was hoping you'd wear it tonight. Would you mind if I introduced you to some people? There are several collectors here who have been curious about the piece, and I think they'd enjoy meeting the inspiration behind it." For the next hour, I found myself in conversations with gallery visitors, collectors, and other artists who were genuinely interested in my ring and the story behind it. They examined it with the kind of attention I'd always felt it deserved, recognizing the craftsmanship and artistry that casual observers missed. One woman, a collector who owned several of Chen's pieces, spent 10 minutes studying the metalwork with the jeweler's loupe. "The way he's achieved this color-shifting effect is remarkable," she said, "and the proportions are perfect for your hand. He must have worked from very detailed measurements." A young artist asked about my experience wearing such an unconventional engagement ring, whether I ever felt self-conscious about its non-traditional appearance. I found myself telling him about the various reactions I'd encountered, the assumptions people made, the way it had taught me to value authentic appreciation over superficial recognition. "That's exactly what Marcus intends," the artist nodded. "His work is designed to be discovered rather than announced. It rewards those who look carefully and dismisses those who only see surface appearances." As the evening progressed, I realized I was experiencing something profound. For months, I had been allowing other people's limited perspectives to make me question something I treasured. Tonight, surrounded by people who understood and appreciated exceptional artistry, I was seeing my ring through new eyes. Not because its value had changed, but because I was finally in the company of people educated enough to recognize what had always been there. But the real revelation came later, after most of the crowd had dispersed, and Chen was showing us some pieces that weren't part of the public exhibition. "The truth is," he said, "commercial success in jewelry often comes from creating pieces that announce themselves loudly. But the work I'm most proud of speaks quietly to those who understand its language." He picked up one of his signature pieces, a necklace that looked almost simple until you examined it closely and discovered its incredible complexity. Anyone can create something flashy that gets immediate attention. The real challenge is creating something that reveals its beauty slowly, that becomes more precious the longer you live with it. Looking at my ring as he spoke, I understood that David had given me something far more valuable than an expensive piece of jewelry. He had given me wearable poetry, a daily reminder that the most meaningful things in life often come disguised as ordinary, waiting for those wise enough to recognize their true worth. That night, as David and I walked home through the quiet streets, I felt like I was wearing my ring for the first time, not because anything about it had changed, but because I finally understood the full depth of thought and artistry it represented. More importantly, I understood that its value had never depended on other people's recognition. The next day brought an unexpected opportunity to put this new confidence to the test. I had an appointment to meet with a potential client, a high-end wedding planner who was considering hiring me for several upcoming events. The meeting was at her office in the most upscale part of town, and I dressed carefully, wanting to make a professional impression. The wedding planner, Victoria, was exactly what I had expected. Perfectly polished, impeccably dressed, surrounded by photos of elaborate celebrations that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her office was a shrine to luxury, every surface covered with examples of the kind of weddings that made magazine covers. We had been discussing my portfolio for about 20 minutes when she noticed my engagement ring. I saw her eyes linger on it, her expression shifting slightly as she processed what she was seeing. Like so many others, she was clearly trying to categorize it and finding herself confused by its unconventional appearance. "That's an interesting ring," she said carefully. "Very unique." In the past, I might have felt defensive or tried to explain or justify my choice. But now, armed with new confidence and understanding, I simply smiled. "Thank you. It was designed specifically for me by Marcus Chen." The change in Victoria's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes widened, her posture straightened, and suddenly she was looking at both me and my ring with entirely different eyes. "Marcus Chen," she repeated, leaning forward to get a better look. I had no idea. I've been trying to get one of his pieces for years, but his waiting list is impossible. I watched, fascinated, as her entire assessment of me shifted in real time. Suddenly, instead of someone she was evaluating, I became someone she wanted to impress. The conversation turned from her questioning my qualifications to her practically begging me to work on her events. But here's what surprised me. I felt no satisfaction in her changed attitude. Instead, I felt disappointed in her, and by extension, in a system that valued people based on external symbols rather than inherent worth. The Victoria who had been cautiously professional was more authentic than the one who was now gushing about my incredible taste and obviously refined aesthetic sense. I accepted her job offer because the work itself interested me and the pay was excellent. But I made a mental note about the kind of person she was underneath her polished exterior. Someone whose respect could be bought with a designer name wasn't someone whose opinion held much weight in my personal value system. Over the following weeks, word seemed to spread about my ring through certain circles in the city. I began receiving invitations to art openings, gallery events, and social gatherings I had never been included in before. At first, I wondered if David had somehow orchestrated this, but he seemed as surprised as I was by the sudden social attention. The truth was both simpler and more complex. In a world where people were constantly trying to signal their sophistication and taste, having a Marcus Chen original was like carrying a membership card to an exclusive club. But unlike most luxury goods that announced themselves loudly, Chen's work required knowledge to appreciate, which made it even more valuable as a social signifier among those who considered themselves true connoisseurs. I found myself navigating a strange new social landscape, where the same ring that had been dismissed by some was now opening doors I hadn't even known existed. Gallery owners who might not have given my work a second look were suddenly interested in my artistic perspective. Potential clients who might have found me too unconventional were now drawn to what they perceived as my sophisticated taste. It was an education in human nature that was both enlightening and somewhat depressing. I began to understand that most people's reactions to beauty, to art, to other people were heavily influenced by external validation rather than personal aesthetic judgment. They needed to be told something was valuable before they could see its worth. But the experience also taught me something valuable about confidence and self-presentation. When I wore my ring with pride and knowledge of its significance, when I carried myself like someone who deserved respect regardless of others' opinions, people responded differently. Confidence, I learned, was as visible as any piece of jewelry and often more attractive. The real test came 6 months later when David and I returned to the same jewelry store where I had been treated so dismissively. This time, David wanted to buy me something special for our first anniversary, and we thought it would be meaningful to purchase it from the same place where I had learned such an important lesson about self-worth. The same sales associate was working, though she didn't immediately recognize me. We browsed casually, and I watched as she approached other customers with the same assessing glances I remembered from my previous visit. When she finally approached us, her initial demeanor was polite but reserved, clearly trying to gauge our buying potential. David and I had decided beforehand how we wanted to handle this. We looked at several pieces, asking thoughtful questions, treating the associate with the courtesy she had failed to show me before. When she noticed my engagement ring, I saw the now familiar moment of confusion cross her face. "That's a very unusual ring," she said, clearly fishing for information. "Yes," I replied simply, "it's a Marcus Chen original." The transformation was immediate and predictable. Suddenly, we were her most important customers. Suddenly, every piece in the store was available for our consideration. Suddenly, I was someone whose taste and judgment she sought to understand and emulate. But then something unexpected happened. As she was showing us a particularly beautiful necklace, another customer entered the store. A young woman in casual clothes, obviously nervous, obviously operating on a tight budget. She approached the display cases with the kind of careful hopefulness I remembered from my own first visit. I watched as the sales associate glanced at the new customer, taking in her appearance, making the same snap judgments she had made about me. I saw her mentally prioritize, deciding that David and I were worth her attention while this newcomer could wait. It was a moment of choice. I could continue enjoying my newfound respect, basking in the validation that comes from being recognized and valued. Or I could remember what it felt like to be on the other side of that judgment. "Excuse me," I said to the sales associate, "but I think that young woman needs assistance. We're happy to wait while you help her." The sales associate looked confused, clearly not understanding why I would defer to someone she had already categorized as less important. But customer service training took over, and she approached the young woman with professional courtesy, if not enthusiasm. I watched as the scene played out exactly as I had experienced it months before. The young woman was interested in a simple piece, something she had obviously saved carefully to afford. The sales associate was polite but distant, clearly conveying that this wasn't her most important sale of the day. That's when I made another decision. I approached the young woman and complimented her choice, engaging her in the kind of warm conversation that makes shopping a pleasure rather than an ordeal. I told her how beautiful the piece looked on her, how it brought out the color of her eyes, how lucky someone was going to be to receive such a thoughtfully chosen gift. The sales associate watched this interaction with growing confusion. Here was her VIP customer, the woman with the Marcus Chen ring, taking time and interest in someone she had pegged as insignificant. It clearly didn't fit her understanding of how social hierarchies were supposed to work. But something else was happening too. The young woman, energized by genuine encouragement and appreciation, was gaining confidence. Her posture straightened, her smile became more radiant, and suddenly she was carrying herself like someone who deserved to be in that beautiful store, looking at beautiful things. By the time she made her purchase, the dynamic in the store had completely shifted. The young woman left glowing with happiness and confidence. The sales associate had learned something about making assumptions, and I had discovered that the best use of unexpected privilege is to extend it to others who need it. David and I completed our own purchase, a simple pair of earrings that would remind me of this day. And the lesson it taught. As we left the store, David squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. That was beautiful to watch. Walking home, I realized that the journey with my engagement ring had taught me something profound about value, recognition, and self-worth. The ring itself hadn't changed, but I had grown into someone who understood that true value doesn't depend on external validation, and that the greatest privilege comes with the responsibility to lift others up. 6 months later, David and I had our simple wedding in the botanical garden, surrounded by people who loved us for who we were rather than what we possessed. My engagement ring, now joined by a matching wedding band that Chen had created as a wedding gift, caught the light as I promised to love David for all the reasons that had nothing to do with status or recognition. In my wedding photos, you can see the joy on my face, the confidence in my posture, the genuine happiness that comes from knowing you're exactly where you belong with exactly the right person. The rings are visible but not prominent, beautiful accessories to a story that was always about something much deeper than jewelry. That young woman in the store sent me a letter a few months later. She had used the confidence gained from our encounter to apply for a promotion at work, had started taking art classes she had always wanted to try, had begun seeing herself as someone worthy of beautiful things and meaningful experiences. "Sometimes," she wrote, "all it takes is one person treating you like you matter to change how you see yourself." I kept that letter as a reminder that the most precious things we can give each other cost nothing but attention, kindness, and the recognition that everyone deserves to be seen and valued for who they truly are. My ring had taught me that lesson, but more importantly, it had given me the opportunity to pass it on. Today, when I look at my rings, I see more than Marcus Chen's artistry or David's thoughtfulness in choosing them. I see symbols of a journey toward understanding that true worth comes from within, that authentic beauty doesn't need external validation, and that the most valuable thing any of us possesses is the power to recognize and celebrate the worth in others. The people who laughed at my fake ring revealed more about themselves than about my jewelry. But perhaps more importantly, they gave me the gift of discovering my own strength, my own values, and my own understanding of what really matters in this beautiful, complicated world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.